Hi, Dr. Julie.
Hi.
Oh, it's so lovely to have you here today.
It's amazing to be here. It's really nice to come and meet you.
I know, a long time coming, because
Yes.
I've been sort of watching what you're doing, and I think we're on a very similar mission, although coming from different angles. Yours, obviously, from a clinical psychologist angle. I don't know quite what my angle is, I guess, sort of like telling stories and listening to other people's stories. But I think we both very much want to help the sort of mental health issues that we see are very prevalent at the moment.
Yeah.
Would you go as far to say that we are in a mental health crisis at the moment?
I think it gets talked about a lot, doesn't it, in that way? And I think anything that's talked about in the media, they attach the word crisis or chaos to it. And that always kind of gets me. But there is, there's a big problem for sure. And it's not going away, and we need to talk about it, and we need to work out what needs to happen in order for things to change. I don't know. I think it is worse than it was, but I think we have this tendency to kind of maybe talk about things as a crisis when without the data kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm always,
And it's not that helpful, is it, to go, crisis, deal with that? Because it just feels like this huge insurmountable issue.
Yeah.
And all of us are kind of in it and trying to work out what the hell's going on. And I'm pretty sure we can all see the systemic problems, the structural issues that we're all trying to deal with how fast the world moves. And I think that is just a huge one. We're not even looking at how quickly everything is moving. And I think all of us feel this sense of, like I said to my husband yesterday, I want to get off. Like, the roundabout's going too quick. I want to get off. Everything's moving so quickly. And I think, like most people, feel like I'm just chasing my tail constantly. And although that's not the main cause for all issues, I think it's quite basic things like that are really troubling many of us.
Yeah, and I think those are quite small things in our day as well that add up. The shift from back in the day when you used to go into work and there would be a pile of post that arrived that day, and that was what you had to deal with that day, and you could do that in a certain amount of time. And then nobody else could send you a letter that day, right?
Take me back.
You then had the rest of your day to do what you had to do. But now there's this sense of, if you miss an email, that even with we were talking about parenting. If you're a parent and the school sent an email at 4 p.m. that day for something that's tomorrow, then somehow you should have been on your email to get there and reply to it or do whatever it is you need to do. There's this kind of sense that we're always available, and we should be, and that just triggers so much stress and anxiety, because you can't be, right? You can't be ultra productive, which demands focus, and be available to everyone all the time. It's impossible to do both.
It is, but it's so the norm that we have to basically buck against so many trends to simply stay sane. We have to go, all right, I'm not going to move at that pace. I'm not going to be on my phone or my laptop all day. I'm not going to put the expectation on myself that I have to be the best parent, the best worker if you work, have the most exciting, glitzy social life, which is presented to us. We're bombarded with it. And I think we do have to sort of buck these trends to... I'm sort of talking quite passionately, I guess, from a place of, this is how I feel, that I have to buck against all of it to just feel okay.
Yeah. And I think that there is, in some ways, that's the power of social media. Social media can be sort of reinforce some of those trends, but it also enables you to kind of have access to people that are backing the trend. So it kind of gives you permission to go, oh, yeah, okay, it's okay not to join that thing or make 100 cupcakes for the school fete every month, because apparently you should have that time, or all those kind of silly things that we can kind of get into that pressure. Sometimes having access to people who have a different opinion, I think, can be really helpful.
I do. I think it's really inspiring, and I don't mean for that to sound cheesy, but I do think it is. You go, oh, there are other options out there.
Yeah.
I literally felt like this weekend I was in an episode of Motherland. Like everything that happened in my house this weekend, I was like, Motherland, we are in Motherland. It's just the most accurate.
It's funny because it's true, right?
It's unbelievably true, that show. I love it. With the patients that you see and that you've seen over the years, Do you notice specific trends or reoccurring themes with the problems that people are presenting to you? Obviously, the anecdotes, the storytelling will be different, but are there themes that always kind of correlate and show why people are in pain?
Yes, in the sense that no matter what the specific problems, it always seems hard to imagine or hard to understand until you've heard somebody's story. And once you hear the traumas that people have been through and the different things they've had to face in their life, you then get to a point where, of course, you feel this way. Why wouldn't you? It makes sense. So I guess, trauma is one of those in its various guises. So that doesn't have to be, sort of war zone type traumas. It can be sort of learning in your early childhood that then doesn't fit with your adult life and the demands that placed on you as an adult. But I think probably the trend that it ended up in me writing the book and putting videos online was this trend of not always young people, but people who were coming along to therapy. By this time I was working privately. So people who come along to therapy, really struggling with self-confidence, lots of self-doubt. And there's this kind of these thoughts around, I won't be able to cope with it. So there's this kind of fear of the future or anything that the future holds or any new situation because they didn't believe in their ability to cope with it. And that was linked with this kind of lack of a set of skills to the tools that you use to get through difficult moments. And that's where I felt like lots of these people didn't need long-term therapy. Once they had the educational aspect of that, so a few tools and a bit of understanding around how their mind works and that we have more influence over emotions than we think, they were raring to go. And even now I kind of feel almost emotional kind of sitting and sort of remembering some of those sort of people. One young girl in particular, she said, you know what, I think I'll be all right. I think I can do this. And she was about to sort of face something difficult. I always felt like I needed some pom-poms behind my therapy chair to go, yes, we got there. This idea that it wasn't magic, it wasn't rocket science. She has suddenly had a few tools under her belt that she felt like it was going to be difficult, but she could face it. And it's that really kind of got me fired up. And then I would, harp on to my poor husband to say, people should have access to this. People shouldn't have to pay to come and see people like me to find out how their own brain works. And
that's very much where the title came from. Yeah. Why has nobody told me this before? Your hugely selling book that is just packed with all of this stuff because we don't learn the basics. We don't have the tools. And I'm sure there are many reasons as to why it's certainly not implemented in a school system setting. It might not be the priority for parents to go, let me teach you this, because you are quite literally surviving daily with kids and getting them through the day, getting yourself through the day. Yeah. So is therapy or learning therapeutic tools the only way we're going to get it? I don't know. Will it change for the next generation? Will it be taught in schools? Will parents prioritise it more?
I think this sort of the kind of arc of history kind of changes gradually, doesn't it? So every positive change that we make will filter down and then we won't do everything perfectly, and then our children won't do everything perfectly, but they'll make positive changes too. And I think then things change gradually through the generations, don't they? And so I feel positive about it, all the while that people like yourself are kind of doing really positive things and opening that conversation and talking about your own experiences and the things that you've learned along the way and sharing that. That's just absolutely key to helping people learn from each other. And, that's the beauty, isn't it, of all of this stuff, podcasts and books and online videos. You just have access to the possibility to self-reflect and learn from it if you want to.
And we all need it. This is the thing. There's still so much weird stigma around therapy. Yeah. There's always headlines about certain people who they've had to go to therapy, and it's like, this should be so normal at this point in time that we understand it isn't for SOS moments. It isn't for I'm absolutely rock bottom. It can be. I've certainly gone to therapy for those exact reasons, but also it can be general maintenance and, like you say, learning these tools. And I think there's so many sort of problems, I guess, with how we talk about therapy. One of them is the stigma, and the other is in this weird, quick modern world we're living in, the quick fix is what everybody wants. And it's why, you know, there's a whole industry around well-being or self-improvement, whatever term you want to use. I don't particularly love that term, but there's a huge industry around that and people wanting to be fixed.
Yeah.
And like you've just said, having the tools, that's not a quick fix. That's, you then use those tools, I guess, in a disciplined way forever. And that's hard work.
Yeah, and it's ongoing work. But I think that can feel quite positive sometimes, can't it? That there's
empowering.
Continued self-discovery. Yeah, absolutely. That it's something you continue to work on, and you know, because I know all the tools and I've studied all the books, but there are still times when, you know, my childhood will play out and I don't use the tools, and then I have to remind myself and go back. And so, I mean, I always want to be really clear on that with you know, being online and that kind of thing. People say, oh, it must be perfect for you. You must never have problems, or you must never get it wrong. And it's just not true. You know, this isn't a path to, you know, being invincible to life's troubles, or it doesn't mean that you're going to get everything perfect all the time. It's a set of tools. Sometimes you'll use them, sometimes you won't. Sometimes you use them and not to great effect, and sometimes you use them and it'll go brilliantly, and you'll feel that kind of yes. But without them, you have much less power to make things go well. So,
and it's the most human thing to not use the tools that you know work. Like, you know, I know all these brilliant people now, and I've learned so much from doing the podcast, the books that I've written, or when we're doing the festival, meeting all these amazing, you know, healers and whatever. And I know that meditation is going to make me feel calmer and ease my anxiety. And I know that certain breath work's going to help, or whatever it might be. Some days, like Friday, I think I had 4 seconds sleep. I literally had the most horrific night of insomnia. My son had been up all night. Friday, I didn't do anything that was positive or moving me in the right direction. I did everything to make myself feel worse. And I know all this stuff. So I think it's really important to say it, because I think people do have an assumption that, you know, within your work or within my work, that we're breezing through it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. You might know the stuff, but you've still got to put the effort in to use it and to implement it. And like you say in the book, the basics are boring. They're boring, but they bloody work.
Yeah. Your mum was right when she used to tell you all, you know, eat right and get to bed on time, all those things. It's because it's true. It just works.
What are the basics? So sleep, eating well. Yeah. What else would you class as a boring basic?
Yeah, so an old supervisor of mine used to call it the solid back four. He was really into football, and he said, you know, if you don't want a goal scored against your team in football, you need 4 really solid defence players. And I would kind of add another one, and I say kind of probably a solid back 5. In mental health, you got sleep. Yeah, so sleeping at the right times, not too much, not too little. Nutritional intake, so eating things that are going to help you rather than, and again, not too little, not too much, not at the wrong times during the night, that kind of thing. Routine. Yeah. So we're kind of strange creatures in that we need predictability to a degree, and we need routine, but we also need exploration and adventure. So kind of balance of those things. Exercise, moving your body, is what we were built to do. The research is just, you know, there's piles and piles of it on that. And social contact and good quality social connection. And they are the basics in that they're often the things that when you introduce them to someone, they'll say, yeah, I do that. But they are, without a doubt, the first things that we let slide when we're not feeling so good. And, you know, you don't pick up the phone to your friend, or you say no to that invitation, or you know, eat something that is, you know, will make you feel terrible. And we kind of start to sort of minimize the impact that those things can have. And you take anyone on this earth, I don't care who they are, you start messing around with those 5 things, that person will become vulnerable very quickly to physical and mental illness. And it's a reason why they're the tools that are used against like prisoners of war and things like that. They're the exact things that they mess around with to break people down. And so, I mean, I often encourage people to, you know, in therapy, to just keep an eye on them. So it's not that you have to do them perfectly all the time. And it's okay to have a day where, you know, like you say, you've had a terrible night's sleep, and so you might take a nap in the day, even though you know that's not the best idea for you most of the time. But actually, maybe today you just need a rest. You know, that's that kind of thing. So it's not to kind of be perfectionist about it. But maybe you kind of just pop those 5 things on a Post-it note inside your wardrobe door, and you just look at them, just glance at them every day and say, what's one thing I could do to boost one of those today? So maybe it's, I've eaten pizza all last week because I was away on holiday, and this week I'm going to add some greens into what I eat. Or maybe, actually, I haven't spoken to my friends for 3 weeks. I'm going to make a call tomorrow. Or, whatever it is. It can be something small, but each day you're just checking in, saying, what could I do to boost those? Because they are like a foundation, and without them, things can crumble very quickly when, life throws stuff at us and we can't control a lot of the stuff that, people say, eliminate your stress and things like that. And you can't. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and Brene Brown talks about that fantastically when she says, stress is waiting for that test result from your doctor, or those kind of things. It's the things that you can't control, right? That's real stress. And while we can't stop those things from happening, that's where the foundations come in. That if you're looking after yourself, you're going to be much more able to deal with those punches when they come along.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, that's hugely empowering to know that if we get the foundations right, we're going to stand in much better stead to deal with what life throws at us. Yet, sometimes circumstantially, things are happening out of our control, and it could be something ghastly, and that will directly affect one of those foundations. It could be the stress of that is stopping you from sleeping, or something's triggered an eating disorder that you might have had in the past or are still living with, or whatever. Yeah. How do you combat that? Do you have to look at the circumstance and look to do the healing to then fix the foundation?
It's a bit like, when you have a baby, isn't it? Their sleep is just out the window and it's a bit of a fallacy that it's for a few weeks. It's for a few years, right? My
son's nearly 10 and still doesn't sleep.
Yeah, my son was up last night. And so it's a sort of... When one of those is taken away because of something you don't have control of at the moment, it's about a level of acceptance around that, isn't it? And then boosting yourself in other ways around, rather than sort of getting down on yourself about it not being perfect at that time, and bolstering yourself in other ways. So kind of, that's why things like social support are so important for new mums, because it's another boost of one of those foundations that keeps us going. That if you've only slept for 2 hours that night, having a comforting conversation with a friend is everything, right? And stops you from kind of spiraling down. And so yes, if something else is happening that's kind of making it difficult to maintain all of those foundations, that's why we have to have a balance in all of them, I think.
And you also make a very valid point in those times where things feel off. In the book, you say, don't kick yourself while you're down, which I think we're probably all in a really bad habit of doing that because of this strange level of perfection that we think we're seeing constantly. And that if we're getting something wrong, we're to then pile on top of that blame and shame and everything else. And it's so important to be kind to yourself, which is often the hardest thing to do in those moments, is to have all the stuff, again, we know is good for us, self-compassion and identifying your own self-worth and just being kind to yourself.
Yeah, and often in therapy, when we kind of talk about that sort of subject, the people that you're talking to about that are often the most compassionate, empathic, caring people.
To others.
So it all goes out. I often talk to people about it's like sun rays. It all goes out. So we're not starting from scratch. You know how to do it. We just have to redirect that. And so often a really, and actually it's probably, it's the way that I would use most to sort of access self-compassion, is to think about, is to sort of engage with those feelings of compassion that I have for others. So I might think of my daughter or my son, for example, and that's sort of how I would want to respond to them when they're down, or when they, when something has happened, and how I would want them to have the strength to behave towards themselves in those moments. And then that enables you to engage with the feeling, so that you can then begin to apply that to yourself. But it's everything.
Yeah, I mean, I've done so many sort of post on Instagram about this because I think it's something that I've definitely struggled with personally, and still, if I'm having a bit of a bad patch, it will be the first thing that just goes to shit, my self-compassion, and the response I get normally is, some people are going, I really want to cultivate this and, really know that it's going to help, and I can feel that it's going to help. And then you always get probably half and half. half the portion of people who have seen the post saying, I just can't do it. I don't like myself. And it feels like a dead end, like there's just no way out of that feeling, usually due to stories from the past. And I can certainly relate that to myself. There were certain periods of my life where I felt, how could I like myself after having been through this or having acted like this? Or usually it's related to mistakes, isn't it? Mistakes you've made, bad choices, etc. Yeah. How would you suggest people get over that ginormous hurdle?
I think there are no quick fixes when it's like that. So you can enhance a skill by using some of these exercises. But when there is something in the past that has fundamentally shifted the way that you view yourself or the way that you view the world, that's not easy to, there's no quick fix that's going to suddenly change your beliefs about yourself. And so that's when therapy can be really helpful to go through. And sometimes that can, trauma therapy can be necessary to go back and sort of rewrite some of those narratives and work through and process some of those wounds. When it's really kind of big events in your life or learning experiences that happened over. Because also I think people imagine that a trauma is maybe one big event, and when they can't find one of those, they're wondering whether the rest of it counts as a trauma. But trauma can happen in small elements of time, small pieces of time in just how you were brought up. So your learning experiences as a child, or the society that you lived in, for example, or how you were discriminated against, or whatever the circumstances are. Trauma can happen in little tiny pieces over time that chips away at what you believe about yourself or what you believe about the world. Then you get into adulthood, and it holds you back hugely. It's a survival response that helps you to get by when you're dependent on other people. But as an adult, it then holds you back from being able to function properly.
And I guess we react in the same way again and again to the point where we believe, well, this is just me.
Yeah.
This is how I react to certain situations. There is no changing. That's just who I am. Do you believe it's always possible for somebody to change that pattern and that reaction?
Yeah, and cognitive analytic therapy is fantastic for that. And it's really about understanding that the cycles that you were in as a child in your sort of key relationships with caregivers and things, and how the way that you responded to people was part of your survival mechanism. So it helped you to get through whatever difficult environment that was. And then that's key learning. So we then go around those same cycles as an adult. But in adult relationships, the dynamics are different and the responsibilities are different. And suddenly those things that were really effective at helping you get through a difficult situation as a child no longer work, or actually cause you more problems. And you see that with things like people pleasing. So, people will put and it's more than just being a nice person, right? It's putting everybody else first, even to the detriment of your own health and well-being. To the point where it causes problems in your own health, but also like resentment in relationships and things like that, and struggling to assert your own needs or ask for what your needs to be met. And in cat therapy for short, so it's cognitive analytic therapy, you kind of...
Does it involve cats?
Yeah, no, it'd be great if it did, wouldn't it?
That would really help me.
Yeah, I think it would be
so therapeutic.
Probably a great research sort of experiment, wouldn't it, to kind of look at whether that enhanced the effects. But yeah, so it's really about, you literally kind of draw out the cycles of, this happens, then I do this, and the consequence, the unintended consequence that it leads to now. And by doing that, you get that sort of bird's eye view on your life, where you get to see that, okay, I'm doing this because of that sort of echo of the past, but it leads to this. And then I go round and round on this cycle. Where's the exit? How do I get off? What could I do differently? And it all works in hindsight. So you're talking about what happened last week or the week before. But the more you do that, the more you start to sort of almost visualize that bird's eye view, that formulation in the moment. And when you start to do that, you open this kind of window of opportunity to maybe choose something different and break the cycle. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. But again, that's kind of change is slow and stuff.
But it's the awareness that you can, isn't it? Because I think it's quite humbling to go, oh, look at this piece of paper, I'm quite simple.
Yeah.
I do that and that every time, and then it ends in a pile of shit. And then you go, oh, I don't have to do that. And it's that, even making changes is humbling. You're like, oh my God. Especially if you've created an infrastructure in your life where you believe it could be this person's awful, that person causes me pain, and I'm always the victim? You know, obviously there are people that out there who are victims of terrible things and abuse and injustice, but I'm talking about in everyday life, we'll pit ourselves against other people, and that's the story that works for us.
Yeah.
And I think as soon as you start to see your reactions, and it is a very humbling exercise, you can then go, but is that the way it works? Does it have to be like that?
Yeah.
And that's difficult, because when you've labelled someone the enemy or a situation the cause of all your pain, and it doesn't have to be, that's quite a difficult transition to make, I think, isn't it? It's a healthy one, but it's very hard.
Yeah, and a lot of these things happen very gradually, and maybe that's some of the frustration people have with the idea of something like therapy, is that it does take time, and I think that's a big element of why it's less available, because it is not the quick fix. It takes time, but all change that is sustainable takes time, and so we'll often work on a very small part of something, and then you kind of nail that bit, and then you work on the next small part of it and the next small part of it. And so over time, transformation is fantastic. And so often, when I'm working with someone, we'll look back at the beginning and how things were, and then you can really get that sense of, wow, yes, actually we've come so far, and we're still working on this thing because we're always working on the next difficult thing, but we've made some big changes along the way.
Yeah, that's such a good sign, because I think if you haven't really noticed it, you've also been clearly managing it and moving through it and progressing without it being this huge moment. You're just learning, growing, moving on to the next step. I think it's a really healthy thing to, I often do it, sort of look back to when I was at my absolute lowest and go, oh my God, I'm nowhere near there now. And it's not, again, like a quick fix and now all my problems are solved, but I'm certainly reacting in a very different way and making much better choices than I was, say, 10 years ago. And it is slow, and maybe that is one of the reasons why there is still a bit of a stigma. Do you think that everybody would benefit from therapy, or that everybody needs it?
No, I don't think everyone would benefit, partly because some people just don't buy into it at all, and they are, still kind of they still believe that it's it's that kind of older view of therapy, that it's in some way kind of non-medical, which takes away the kind of validity of it in some way, even though it's all sort of evidence-based, the ones that you can kind of access on the NHS and things like that. And I always say to people, it's not something I can do to you. It's something that I can help guide you through. So unless someone buys into something, even if they take a medication, they don't buy into it, it's less likely to work.
Yeah.
So
the power of the brain.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's less likely to. So it's not. I don't think it's for everybody, but it's for everybody who has any kind of struggle and has any vague idea that some level of support could help them through that. Then it's worth it. I get a lot of questions around. Is that enough? Is my distress enough to seek help?
Yeah.
Would I meet the criteria for X, Y, or Z? And I always respond to people with, you don't have to meet any criteria for anything to access help. If you feel that you're struggling and you could benefit from support, then go and seek that if you have access to it. And it's a professional's job to help you work out if therapy is going to be helpful for you.
Yeah. It's so interesting, because sometimes I have brilliant, honest chats with my group of mates about all this sorts of things. And often we'll get into a discussion where one of us will say, oh, no, I'm fine, because blah, blah's got so much more than me going on. And again, we use someone else's story that is, the distress is more valid, or the severity of the situation seems much more impactful, and we go, I'm fine, I don't need any help, I'm fine. And all we're doing is looking for ways out of not getting help ourselves. So like you say, it doesn't matter like what level of distress or trauma. If you're not feeling great and you want help, it could be a really good way of moving through that.
Yeah, I think we don't have to. We can do that without pathologizing down days and rough patches, and that the idea of kind of happiness that somehow we're not there until we're happy all the time.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that.
No, so you can be happy, like, you can have this sort of underlying level of happiness with your life that, everyone you love is safe and healthy, and you're, in a society where you've got a level of control over how you live, or, you've got enough access to resources and money, those kind of things, and you're doing something meaningful, but you can still have a bad day or a bad week or a bad month even because of circumstances. That doesn't mean you're not achieving happiness. That's normal life.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, whereas I think the sort of discrimination around mental illness caused so much fear of the down days and sadness and anxiety that we then, we wouldn't talk about it. Just don't mention it and pretend it's not happening. Whereas, if we acknowledge that's a part of the human experience, that helps anyway, right?
Yeah.
If I acknowledge I'm just anxious today.
So looking at that sort of setup, I think maybe we're all getting the result of therapy, if there is such a thing, because I know it's an ongoing process after you've even had a block of therapy, but we're getting that wrong, because if we're all thinking, after I've had therapy, I will be happy, that is impossible, because like you say, it's ever undulating.
Yeah.
We could be feeling happy right now doing this chat, but then in an hour when you're stuck on the motorway in traffic and you're stressed out, or my kid won't do his homework later on, which is a very normal circumstance in our house, that dissipates and there's another emotion. So what should, if there is such a thing, the end goal of therapy be? Peace? Contentment?
No, I think sometimes those maybe don't even. I remember a supervisor once saying to me that the best outcome of therapy that she'd been to was over a year after therapy. So therapy is almost like I don't know, if you do a training course, for example, immediately after finishing that training course, you won't be at your best in using whatever it is you've learned. Several years later of using those things, you'll be even more accomplished than you were at the beginning. So if you learn certain things in therapy and then you commit to using those in your everyday life, and you commit to continuing whether it be recovery or something else, then you will get better at doing that over time. So, the only way is up in that sense. But yeah, I think we have to kind of steer away from the idea that the top or the most desirable outcome is I'm going to feel pleasure and joy all the time, because actually it's pretty dangerous place to be, right?
Yeah.
Because that when you think about manic episodes, for example, somebody might feel happy all the time, but their life might be falling into pieces around them. So and that kind of fruitfulness of different emotions and the beauty in different emotions, you appreciate those moments of happiness more, or moments of peace more, when for example, I was away in the mountains with my family last week, and heights still triggers huge anxiety in me, and so while I appreciated being there and I was happy to be there, I'd chosen to be there, I still had that level of fear. So I was happy while I was also experiencing anxiety. And then I appreciated that level of calm I got when we returned to sort of ground level, all the more. So I had such gratitude for that sense of peace I got once the stress response had calmed down. So I'm okay with all of that. If I have to live with that sort of stress response being triggered by heights the rest of my life, I won't stop doing that. I will still, because those things make me and my family happy. You've
perfectly described how I feel every time I work.
Okay.
Which is happy, but slightly anxious.
Yeah.
Because it feels like there's too much to lose if it goes wrong.
Yeah.
And because it's publicly consumed, there's the anxiety. But like you say, I'm not going to stop doing it.
Yeah.
They always sit together. I very rarely do a podcast or a radio show or anything just feeling okay.
And that will be an absolute shocker to so many people, because you always present yourself you come across so calm and chilled and relaxed all the time. So I guess it's your podcast, isn't it? But I'm really interested, I'm sure lots of people are interested to know how you cope with that.
I've very much set my own boundaries in terms of knowing what I'm capable of and what levels of anxiety I'm willing to endure. So the level of anxiety I would have doing something like this is something I'd be absolutely fine with, because it's normal to me that I would feel like I want to do my best. I want to deliver the best possible outcome for the listener and experience for my guest. And I think if I didn't have that anxiety, I don't know if I'd be able to do that for some reason.
Yeah.
But doing something like a live radio show, which I used to do I used to literally be like shopping on Zara, doing a link. Welcome to the show. I'd be loving it, but I'd also be trying to buy some boots. I'd be so relaxed, unbelievably. And due to stuff that went down in my own life, the thought of doing that now is like, I absolutely have a PTSD response to even thinking about going in a radio studio. I will not do it at this point in time. I might down the line. So I very much created my own world where, okay, I feel happy and I can manage this level of anxiety. But when it goes into panic attacks, insomnia, no thank you. I'm not even interested in trying to combat that at the moment. I want to feel sort of, I don't know, as balanced as I possibly can, but still pushing myself. So I think I'm very lucky that I have a job where I can monitor that somewhat, because sometimes you don't get the chance to. There are no moving parts. I'm, luckily, because I'm, I don't know, 6 years down the line in this job, I have got a bit more wiggle room. Whereas if this was the start of my career, I'd have to make a choice. I'd do it or I don't have a job. So I feel very fortunate that I have got some moving parts to play around with. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's why I'm never interested in totally ridding myself of anxiety altogether, like eradicating its existence, because it actually serves me a lot of the time, keeps me on my toes, keeps my brain whirring, and also I can offer some honesty, which hopefully might resonate. So I think it is really interesting when looking at, don't vilify a whole pool of emotions that you must never feel anxious, sad, anger's a big one, because I get angry about things in a full-on way, and actually it gives me it charges me up, it gives me energy. I'm motivated to look for new avenues or whatever it might be. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, and it's lovely as well that you kind of had that balance around doing something that feels meaningful to you, and so challenging it as much as you need, but not, because there is no use in facing all of your fears just for the sake of it, nope. or risking your health just for the sake of it, and it's unless you really, really wanted to go back into radio, is there a need to put yourself through that? And it's always around that balance of kind of values and the meaning, and it's the same with me and height. So it's just a sort of a learning experience from my childhood that's just lingered, partly because to treat a phobia you need consistent frequency. You need to do it all the time so that your body kind of habituates to it. So if I had a job at the top of some, high building in London, I can't think of one, but then after a few days or a few weeks, I would feel pretty chilled about it. But because I live in a town where the highest building has probably 3 floors, then I just never get exposed to it. But I challenge it when it means something to me. So if my children want to, learn to snowboard, or if we're going on holiday and they want to go up that tower in the castle, then I got to use all my skills to keep my stress response low enough that I can manage that. And then it makes me happy that I've challenged myself, that I haven't held them back, and that we've had a lovely experience as a family. But yeah, it is finding that balance. We don't have to, face every single fear we've ever had just for the sake of it.
Yeah. And it's the most normal human thing to be scared of things. I talk to my kids about it all the time, because my son gets really freaked out at night and he's not even sure what he's scared of anymore. So we talk about fear a lot, and I always sort of, probably they're like yawning with me telling these stories, but I had I've talked about on the podcast before, a huge period where I didn't drive on the motorway for like 5 years. And it was exactly the same feeling as, that live radio of there's just too much to risk here, me being on the motorway in a car. And I did exactly what you're saying. I just kept doing it with someone with me in the car, obviously, and kept exposing myself to it after a 5-year break. I did some therapy that was directly focused on it as well. And I'm now doing it without much anxiety. There might be a little tiny bit that creeps in, and I'm able to sort of shut that bit of my brain off and go, no, we're just driving the car, get on with it. Or I'll just talk to someone and I don't even go there sort of cognitively. But I think it is again, people feel worried to sort of talk about this stuff, to admit their fears. And I guess when does a fear go into a phobia? Like, would you say, are you phobic of heights? What is the difference?
Yeah, so, fear can be quite generalised, can't it? And you could have a sort of a generalised anxiety response way, or anxiety is triggered by seemingly anything, and people can feel like they're always anxious then, because they might be just as triggered by a social situation as, I don't know, a thunderstorm or a dark night, or, and it feels as though they just generally always feel unsafe, whereas phobias tend to be something specific. And, you have all these kind of weird and wonderful names for different phobias of something very kind of specific. So it might be heights, or it might be enclosed spaces, or, something like that. But and often they're from some sort of learning. I mean, mine is definitely, a sort of learning experience from early childhood, that if it's not addressed, like I said, with that kind of frequency and intensity, then it just sort of, it's almost like a physical memory. It just sort of lingers. So I always get the response. But I now have the skills to be able to manage it. I talk in the book about when he wasn't my husband then, but when Matt and I went to Pisa, and we went up the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and we hadn't been together that long, and he kind of produced the tickets. I'm thinking,
yay!
Oh no, yeah. And so I talk about the story of me kind of trying to, oh yeah, let's do it, because he bought the tickets, and then getting to the top and just kind of dropping to the floor and kind of just looking down, because I was avoiding looking at how high I was. I was avoiding that response. So I guess I kind of talk about that in terms of what I did wrong. So how I probably reinforced my own fear by the things that I did, by avoiding it and escaping it as soon as I could, that kind of thing. Because often, if you want to address a fear, the idea is to, do it on a regular basis. You don't have to flood yourself with the worst case scenario. You build it up gradually. It's called graded exposure. And, so if I was to do that now, and go up the top of Pisa, instead of dropping to the floor and panicking and thinking about how the whole thing's going to tip over, I would allow myself to look at the view, and I probably gradually get closer and closer to the edge, use breathing techniques to kind of keep that stress to a certain level, and stay there until my body calmed. And that's the key, is that your brain learns through experience. So if you can stay in a situation until your body pretty much exhausts itself, so it habituates to the situation, then your brain clocks one bit of evidence that, hey, I can be in this situation and I survive it. So the next time you then go into that situation, your anxiety still goes up, but it's a tiny bit less, because you've got this evidence that you can get through it. And so the more you do that, the more that the response, the stress response gets less and less each time.
And the less you do it, the more of a monster you create, because the motorway for me became, it's like a battlefield. And actually when I got on it, I was like, okay, I'm doing it, but the more you ignore it, just the bigger it gets. And then talk to us about a new word that I learned from your book, metacognition.
Yeah. So it's the sort of main tool that we use in therapy is, so your brain has the ability to think and have thoughts, but it also has this incredible ability to think about the thoughts that it's having. And I guess that's what we're doing now, right? We're talking about experiences, and that's what you do in therapy is, you look at, okay, here's the feeling. What are you feeling right now? And what are the thoughts that are going with that? And where do you feel that in your body? So you're kind of stepping back from your experience and observing it. And it's by doing that you get to see it for what it is. And then you get choices to behave or act based on, other knowledge or hindsight and awareness, rather than maybe impulsively or just in response to your emotion.
How do you work with people that have no self-awareness, which I'm sure I know people like that. What do you do in that circumstance? Because I think self-awareness seems like it's the first step in then being able to make a different choice, like knowing what you're doing and seeing how you're reacting to situations.
Yeah, it can be really gradual, actually, so I don't know if you know, but kind of in CBT, for example, in cognitive behaviour therapy, they'll often do a really simple formulation where they draw a cross on the page, and you've got your thoughts, your emotional experience, your physical sensations, and then your behaviour, so what you do or don't do. And they're all part of your experience, but they're like weaves in a basket. So, they're all linked up and influencing each other, but you don't necessarily experience them separately or notice them separately, you experience the basket, right? I've just got this experience. And some people are really aware of the physical sensations, but don't necessarily have words for the emotional experience just because they never have, right? Maybe it just wasn't taught to them. Or maybe they're not really aware of the thoughts that they have. Or some people are more aware of the thoughts and are not in touch with their bodies. So, a lot of therapy will be building up that awareness of, okay, when you notice your heart feels like it's going to explode, what are you thinking? What are the thoughts that came before that? Or, what emotions are there? And so it's really sort of gradual. But again, it requires a person to be willing to look into that and expand that awareness.
Another word that we will hear all the time, and I think we hear it so much now, it's become vague, is mindfulness. What would your definition of that be? And how would you suggest somebody uses it to feel less anxious or to lift their mood, etc.?
Yeah, and with mindfulness, I think I include this in the book actually, is when I was doing my clinical training, and there was a group of maybe kind of 18 of us, I think it was. And these two trainers came in to give us our sort of introduction to mindfulness. And it's a part of the core learning, so we had to do it. And you would think that a bunch of trainee clinical psychologists would be really open-minded and really kind of willing to learn. And the room was full of giggles and messing around. And I genuinely had that thought of, how on earth am I going to teach somebody this in a room without just, how cringe. Like, oh, God, this is going to be awful. And who's really going to find this beneficial? What is this going to do? And I had all of those kind of cynical thoughts. And it was only through practicing it, because I had to and because I wanted to do the job really well, that I got that moment of, okay, this is it. And I think you have to kind of leave behind any stereotypes that put you off. So this idea that you have to be sat in front of a tree with some candles and, crossing your legs and humming or anything like that. You don't really have to do that at all. The sort of first most effective mindfulness session I had was when I was out running, actually, and I was really stressed. It was exam season. I probably went out for a run just to get away from the desk, and I thought, do you know what, I'm going to just try and focus on the sound of my feet on the gravel. So I'm running through the forest, and my mind would constantly go off to, oh, I've got to do that email, I've got to do that assignment, or that one, oh, maybe I'm going to fail that one. But every time my mind went off, I just noticed where it had gone, and I drew it back to the sound of my feet on the gravel. And I probably did that, 2,000 times while I was jogging. And it wasn't until the end of the run that I kind of thought, oh, yeah, actually, what I've collected there is all these little moments of being present. And not, I didn't try to complete my assignment while I was jogging. And I was aware of the space around me. I was present. And I was also aware of where my mind went to and the feelings that brought up when my mind went there. And now I know that I can choose to bring my mind back if I want to. So it's really that ability to, it's the metacognition. It's the noticing where your mind's gone and just gently guiding it back without criticizing yourself for, some people say, I can't do mindfulness because I can't focus. And you really don't need to be focused. It's the idea of noticing when your mind has gone somewhere and gently guiding it back. And doing that again and again and again. Like
a little puppy dog. And like you say, it's so interesting to see how your body reacts to that. Because sometimes I'll do little experiments. Like I'll go on social media and I'll scroll. And then after a minute, I'll go, oh, wow, my shoulders are like rocks. Or you feel this thing. It doesn't have to be social media, but whatever it is, or you're looking at your emails. Versus I'm desperately actively meditating again every day. Like I know that it works for me and I will give myself every excuse to not do it. And if I do 10 minutes, every time I'm like, my body feels so much better. Like everything is looser and like all the bones are where they should be. And it's a really instant, interesting experiment to see what your physical reaction is. Maybe it's going on the tube and you feel yourself tense up, whatever. It's really an interesting experiment to put yourself through.
That sort of awareness that it builds is incredible. And I so many times I've had people sort of return to therapy 6 months or a year later, say, everything seems to be going downhill. And when you kind of look at it and they'll go, I haven't really been meditating for a couple of months, or maybe I'll start it again. And then things improve. And so it just helps so many people. And to be honest, I don't know of everyone. A lot of people don't dive into it and don't commit to it. But of the people that do, and they put it into their life every day, I don't know anyone that hasn't found positive benefit from that.
Yeah. My husband's just started meditating in a really, like, he's all or nothing. And he's every day, every morning. He has 7 minutes, very short.
Yeah.
And it's just totally, it's been a game changer, like, completely. And that's why I'm now, right, okay, I need to get back on it. He's massively inspired me in that way. What drew you to this line of work? Was there anything in your own sort of upbringing or life that made you think, I need to understand this stuff better?
Yeah, do you know, I have memories of being a really young... I mean, I don't have these sort of epiphany moments where I said, this is what I've got to do. But now I look back and I see how it sort of happened, really. And, that, you know, I remember when I was young, I don't know, maybe can't be any more than 6 or 7, and I would lay in bed awake at night and I would worry about all the animals that were out in the cold at night and what they were feeling. So I had this kind of like sort of this empathy and this compassion for, I didn't want anyone else to be in distress.
I'm going to worry about that tonight now.
I know. And the donkeys
and the hedgehogs and the foxes.
Yeah, and I used to worry about, would they be cold?
Yeah.
Or how would they feel about that?
I might knit some small blankets.
Could I collect them all up?
Yeah.
And, you know, so I guess I had that that sort of intrinsic wish to not let anybody suffer and to kind of soothe other people, but never really thought of anything of it. And I was a big reader as a kid, but I never read sort of big fantasy type stories. It was always about real people in real lives, normal kind of everyday stuff. And I was always so fascinated about, you know, how those stories led to certain outcomes and what made them do things the way that they did them. And then it just so happened that the small school I was at, psychology became an option at the sixth form, and that sounds okay, let's just try it. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And it was just this deep dive of, yes, okay, can I read more? And then it became the thing that I would read for pleasure as well as for school, and so then went to university to do it. And I just followed my interests after that. And
it is never ending. Like, you can never have read all of it or understood. It's just a never ending subject. It's so exciting.
Yeah, and I guess if that subject wasn't for you, that would feel awful, right? Oh God, I'm never going to get to the end of it. But for me, that's feeling. Yes, so there's always a new book to read. And
there's always like a million that I don't have time to read.
Yeah.
So we all know that therapy is a bloody good idea if you think that you need help in whatever way, whether it's trauma or just everyday coping mechanisms. But we also know the problems are the waiting lists are huge if you're going through the NHS.
Yeah.
And you could be on a waiting list for months and months. And if you can't afford to go private, you might feel dead-ended. What would you say the answer is if people are in that conundrum of desperately wanting it but not being able to access it?
Yeah, I think and it's very real for so many people. I'm constantly getting emails and messages of people saying, what can we do? And it's not ideal, that genuinely, if people are able to access private therapy, then go for it. But realistically, a lot of people can't do that. And that's when things like what you're doing is an incredible resource for people, or being able to buy books and educate yourself, or go online and educate yourself for free. YouTube is full of that kind of stuff. And all of my channels are, my attempt to make things as available as possible. Because you can educate yourself through these things. But when, for people who are really, really unwell, often it's people around them who are saying, what can we do to support someone? And then there's a whole different ballgame then, because if somebody is really poorly and not able to, that's not easy. If you're at a really dark place, to even open a book and read one page is a huge task. So, it's not okay the way that things are at the moment, and that there's a huge group of people who are just being neglected by the system.
Yeah. I know. What the fuck are we going to do?
Yeah. Start campaigning.
I know, that worries me, because there just isn't enough funding. There aren't enough resources for people who, like you say, the ones that are in dire situations. And I'll forever feel lucky that when I was at rock bottom, I I had a friend that took me to a therapist and we were able to do that. And I will forever be grateful, because that was, again, didn't fix everything, still doing all the work, but it was a springboard to, okay, things might be all right. Yeah. And there are so many people that just cannot get that first rung of the ladder to get out of the depths of despair. And, I guess that's what, again, we go back to the start of this conversation, we're both trying to do the same sort of thing, offering resources, conversations, access to knowledge, brilliant books like this one that you've got here that you've written. It's a starting point, but so much needs to be done systemically, and that's something that you and I sadly can't tackle alone, but we'll keep looking into.
But I guess in some ways, sort of helping to educate people. So even if for people who are really poorly and unable to sort of access that kind of education or put it into place, even by educating the people around that person, community becomes everything. So being able to, a lot of the sort of messages I get from family members saying, what can I do? How can I support them? What about this? And so if those people can educate themselves about the best way to support people, then community becomes a huge part of the solution, and that ability to kind of support each other when the services just aren't there. Yeah. Well, look, just keep doing what you're doing. I love watching your YouTube videos. I loved this book, like millions of other people. And it's been so lovely to have you on Happy Place today. It's been great to be here. Thanks so much. Thank you.